Gardening is good therapy for just about anyone. We'll have more on that. And our Northland experts helping you solve all kinds of garden issues. That's straight ahead on Great Gardening.
We're like producing a serious amount of food.
We hope to be able to provide food for the community.
I love sharing the garden with others.
You can do a lot of fun things with broccoli.
All of our students here are involved in gardening.
It has a sign on the door that says My Happy Place, and it really is.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Great Gardening, brought to you from our homes. Horticulturist and educator Bob Olin is here, along with garden professional Deb Burns-Erickson, and I really hope you guys are staying safe and enjoying all the things that are growing all around you. Bob, some color erupting in the garden right now.
Oh, it's happening very, very quickly, and depending on where you're located and how warm it is, we're beginning to see some of the spring flowering shrubs, so that's a great sign, and some of the spring flowering bulbs are beginning to emerge. Scilla and Forsythia are the two that I just happened to spot in the landscape.
Yeah, I love the blue and the yellow, and seeing both of those right now is just kind of, I don't know, rejuvenating, I guess. Deb, we know you've been surrounded by green and color in the greenhouse for probably months now. Have you been able to get outside and see some of it out there as well?
Well, not very much, but I am having a lot of feedback from customers, and some of the rhododendrons are struggling, and a lot of questions on that, and grooming them back. And, you know, the snow load was tough on the rhododendrons this year.
It really was, and mine, which just went in last year, you know, a lot of broken branches, but still some good blooms. So I'll just have to get in there and cut out the dead stuff, I guess, right?
Yeah. It's going to struggle to repair, so if you clean it up, that'll put more energy into the bloom and into the buds too. So. All
right. Well, a lot of people are busy planting and assessing and sending us questions and concerns. So please keep sending those to askgardening@wdse.org. We're doing our best to get your emailed questions on the air. And tonight we want to talk about horticultural therapy. And I know, Bob, both you and Deb know the health benefits of gardening, and you've even done some research on that.
Yeah, I would say I've done some of the literature search. I personally haven't done the research, but it's very, very intriguing. I've called it horticulture and human health. And we all know the benefits, of course, of eating more fruits and vegetables. The vegetable side in particular, there's more and more reinforcing research that there are many beneficial antioxidant components there. But the physical activity, you know, I actually recorded the number of calories you'd burn working your garden through the season, and it's about the equivalent of running 2 marathons, Pam. So there's plenty of physical activity there. And I think just being out in the sunlight, the vitamin D you're generating, it just lifts everybody's spirits for certain.
Yeah, psychologically it's great. And gardening is also being used to assist people with different abilities. So last summer we caught up with a master gardening class where a certified trainer helped the gardeners practice how they can better help others.
Our program today is a horticultural therapy workshop geared towards Master Gardener volunteers. The Master Gardener program is one about training volunteers in horticulture and gardening to go make a difference in their community. We know plants have a positive benefits on our mind, bodies, and spirits. We have a lot of research these days that now show what those benefits are, and it's research that I take and work into what we're doing so the people we're working with can better experience plants. So this group that we're looking at now is role-playing a limited sensory ability around vision. Hort therapy can take a lot of different forms. They're role-playing attention deficit disorder. And so if I was to take this to the next level, my goal was to get them to focus on a task for 10 minutes. Where down here with the limited sight, this could be teaching them life skills on how to navigate through a garden area and maintain that independence. I'm trying to give them a framework in which they can take this knowledge they have of either people or plants, bridge it so they can engage their populations with it. So the definition of horticultural therapy, it's the process of using plants in some sort of structured way to help an individual reach a goal. We know the plants do the body good. We've known that for a long time.
And yeah, we really appreciate the Douglas County Master Gardeners sharing that workshop with us. And again, a lot to learn there.
I've often said there's always something for everybody. And even if you have difficulty with one of your senses, gardening impacts all the senses: smell, texture, touch, obviously sight. And there's something in it for everybody, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, everybody seems to have questions about gardening as well. We're getting a lot of them via email. Thanks to people for sending those in. So Deb, here's a good one about a woman who's going to put some containers along the front of her house. She bought 6 22-inch pots after negotiating with her husband that she could put in there because he didn't want anything around the house that he built. But anyway, Becky is looking for ideas to put in these pots, which are mostly facing south. She was thinking hydrangeas or some kind of a larger plant. What do you think?
I think the hydrangeas or any shrub and a lot of perennials would struggle with that, because they don't stay consistent in the winter. So I think that would be a struggle. There are large dahlias that she could put in there and they would love that condition. And then she could also pull the bulbs then go at the end of October going into November, and then she could replant them. And if she told him the house will look bigger as you draw it out with more containers, then that might be a way to appease him too.
Good point. Good point. Bob, I know she said that she could bring the pots into the unheated garage in the winter. So are there other options there then for those pots?
Well, we're of course talking about the cold penetration for some of the perennial materials. I think people are sometimes misled. You come into an unheated garage and it does protect from wind damage, but it can still be 20 below zero in there and can be quite damaging. So I think bulbs, I think that's a good point that Deb makes. And then just annuals, use your trickle irrigation system. Annuals can be beautiful. And you get all that wonderful activity of planting in the spring and then replanting the next year. And you see, that's how you get up to those calories we all need to burn. Bam. A little more activity with annuals.
And another health benefit, if you want to put vegetables in some of those pots. I mean, a lot of people are doing that. You see the salsa gardens or the potted cherry tomatoes, those kinds of things. So that's an option as well.
Some real nice advantages with containers. One of the big things is you don't have much of a weed problem. The downside is you have to be extremely careful about nutrition because those mixes are principally peat-based. Peat doesn't have a lot of the nutrient. Oftentimes you're just fertilizing with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and they need everything else: calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and all the trace nutrients. So you have to be a little bit more conscious of how you feed and supply the nutrients that they need in the containers.
Okay, great. This one, I'm not sure where the gardener is planting because I didn't get a name or a location, but it's about a hydrangea bush, beautiful green, coming up every year. One's white, the other is blue, but they have only bloomed when I first bought them. Sounds like maybe endless summer, but I don't know. Are there issues with other hydrangeas? Deb, do you carry a lot of hydrangeas?
We do carry a lot of hydrangeas, and there's such improved breeding with new ones that will repeat bloom, or at least, bloom every year. But yeah, the endless summer, that's what that one sounds like. And that's been a challenge for everyone in a lot of locations. But yeah, there are other probably better choices that you'll get better bloom on every year, but not a recurrent bloom like they did say for endless summer.
Could I add one thing to that?
Go ahead, Bob.
We have experienced that. And of course, Endless Summer started a big series now for our good friends down in the south, Bailey's Nursery. But one thing I've observed is if you get that plant to grow vigorously, and then if you put it under a little bit of stress, sometimes that triggers this move from a juvenile to a more mature form where you begin to set bloom. So that kind of surprised me. So sometimes a little less fertility, a little less water, maybe a little less sun, and that oftentimes will trigger the bloom on that plant.
Interesting. Okay, great. Great. All right. Let's see. Duluth Heights. Cindy says their 35-year-old Northwoods maple trees in the backyard are getting kind of old, heavy branches, cracked, rotting cracks in the trunks. And they're wondering about a good choice for a replacement because they really like the shade of those maples.
Well, I'm a fan of maple. I'm actually a fan of Northwood, so I'm surprised she's struggling a little bit. But we are across northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. We are struggling with our maple species. She might consider perhaps using a basswood or something else that would be acceptable for shade. And but I wouldn't give up on the maple either. She could come in with another cultivar. There are some newly developed cultivars that are very good as well.
What about something that's pretty fast growing?
Well, my experience with the fast growers, particularly in maple, we've got some nice hybrid crosses there, but they're not nearly as strong. They're considered kind of a soft maple. Many of them are crossed with, some of the silver maples, which grow very fast. But I've been a little disappointed. For the first 15 years, you're going to be really happy because they grow nicely. But then they do tend to weaken, break apart. They're very susceptible to storm damage. And I think we're going to have some more stormy weather. So I think I would stay with some of the hard maples, the sugars, or the red maples.
This week's tour takes us to a hill in Duluth, and yes, there are lots of those. This one has some unique stationary figures and also gets a lot of wildlife.
Sherrill Husby. We're on Jefferson Street in Duluth, and welcome to my garden. And I've been gardening for about 26 years. And when I moved here, this was all just grass. I had trucks come in with all the rocks. The mannequins a friend had, and they were going to get thrown away. And I said, I will have them. And so I just have them, and I put them out for occasions. Sometimes I dress them, and sometimes I don't. But they're nice, solid figures, and I like them. They're kind of a nod to European gardens. Gardens being about the female form and growing things in. I do not have a specimen garden. I have more of a wild party garden. A lot of the pots we have made, then some, like the one in the middle, a friend made. This is, I put all the blown glass here. And I think I got that when I first started here, but it's blooming well this year, so gotta like that. And then this garden, we used to have a chain link fence in between the yards, and we took down the links and left the poles and just shared the garden, which has been fun. So this is where I put all the birdhouses. Yeah, they really do take off. I've got mostly Virginia creeper, but then I have some bittersweet is mixed in with it. And bittersweet is not supposed to be good for this zone, but it does well here. So these will turn just a scarlet red, and then out will come bittersweet with that orange in the fall. We just call it a playhouse, but we bought it from the home show. But this got used a lot. A lot of times winter in Florida, I have family there. So this is a little bit of the shell collection in here. It's a good place for them. So, and this is a new plant for me. This is the Googly Eye Plant. Isn't that funny? I get a kick out of it. We have woods in one direction, the lake in one direction, a garden in one direction, and a hedge in one direction. And we have so many animals that it's like living in the country, but being right in town.
Sherrill really enjoys the gardening experience, and it was a lot of fun talking to her about her philosophy. And I think, I think it's probably therapeutic for her as it is for a lot of people.
You're so right, Pam. Gardening is meant to be fun. We can't take it too seriously. And I think there's a free spirit that is just really enjoying herself and her garden.
Yeah, she seems to try a little bit of everything. She really had great variety and enthusiastic about all of it. It's great.
Yeah, it is. It's excellent. Okay, let's get to some more questions, you guys. This one comes from Lila. And she's wondering about keeping spring perennial dianthus and lamb's ear more tidy. Dianthus, she gets kind of like straw-like, and the lamb's ear get a lot of brown on them. Should it be cut way back, Deb, or what's the best way to clean that up?
Yeah, I think if people sometimes are patient enough in the spring when things start to green a little bit, then she can give it a nice cut back. Or if it's not greening, then clean it out of there. Again, it's going to struggle to repair itself. If you clean up that dianthus a bit, force it to really push some buds. And the lamb's ear, just cleaning it up gingerly, nicely, because you don't want to ruin the whole plant with that one. You've got to be careful with the lamb's ear. But the dianthus, she could go in there and do, at least halfway back just to simulate some new fresh flush growth. And maybe do a little fertilizing just to give it a little more energy now.
And anything in particular, like just a liquid fertilizer?
Sure, she could do that. We like to use just like an Osmocote, because then you can just treat it with the prills open up at 70 degrees. So when they need it, it's there. And it's just a lot easier than the mix. But the mix is great for foliar application, and they can absorb a bit of that and to get greener quicker. Or Epsom salt is a real quick green up in the spring. You can even sprinkle that right across the top, and you probably have it, laying around. So any of those would be a good choice.
All right. And Bob, Lila's also having trouble with the skyrocket juniper bush, which tips get really brown, seem to be getting worse. A lot of people see that this in the spring and early summer, the brown tips on their evergreens.
In many cases, they'll grow out of those, and just you can prune them up a little bit if they look a little bit better for you. But particularly when we've got northern exposures, juniper is going to be vulnerable to some of that winter burn and winter kill.
Okay. Mary wants to know, when should I do my first treatment of weed and feed on my lawn? And of course, we know a lot of people don't like to use something like that, but if they're going to, how do they go about that, Bob?
Really a good question. People should be conscious of that. Weed and feed, of course, has both fertility and herbicide there. And you never want to use that in your garden as an example, but on the lawn for controlling broadleaf weeds. It won't get you creeping Charlie, unfortunately, but it'll get dandelion and plantain and other more aggressive broadleaves. In this case, I think I would wait a little bit. Spring fertilization, I often tell people mow the lawn once, and then the grass is actively growing. In the case of a weed and feed, it goes on after the rain because the herbicide granules have to adhere to the broadleaf weeds. Straight fertilizer goes on before the rain, or it gets irrigated or watered in, and then a weed and feed goes on after the rain, or if it's not going to rain, water everything first so the lawn is wet, and then make the application of the weed and feed. They can be quite effective, and you get both benefits, weed control as well as some fertility. But people have choices today depending on what they want to do and what their own personal philosophy is.
Right. A lot more choices for people these days that we're hearing about, so that's great. Okay, Colleen, who just took up gardening after watching us. Hooray for you guys, and we really appreciate that. She said her mother-in-law got her interested in gardening by watching our show. She previously lived in the Twin Cities, is now in Cherry, Minnesota, and has some questions. I know that's close to you, Deb, and Colleen wants to know, when can I plant azalea bushes that I just purchased?
Again, it's going to be, you know, how much foliar weight does it have and how much have you, if it's really tight and hasn't broken at all, they could probably go in right away. But if they have some foliar weight, you want to make sure that they get acclimated to the wind. We're just seeing so much wind this spring and it's keeping things dry. So if she wanted to put them in, you know, harden them off a little bit for a week maybe, and then put them in and just water them in really well. And especially if we're having wind, water them well.
Yeah, I think people don't think as much about the wind as a drying factor as they do just the lack of rain.
We might mention as well, because Deb is so right. I was out working, I've got onion plants set in the field, and you know, they haven't really had a chance to establish those roots. And consequently, the top portion was really drying down with the wind. You want to get some additional moisture to anything that you've got planted at this time, because it can be very, very drying and desiccating.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Colleen also wants to know, when should I put out my hummingbird feeders? Is it too early? And I think I've seen them out. Do you guys?
We've seen them. They've been in the greenhouse, so I know they're out.
Yeah, I think people have started putting those out. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think I've seen a hummingbird already. Have you guys noticed any around?
I've seen a few robins.
Yeah, I have one building a nest here.
I think
We have them.
when there's feed available, we'll attract the hummingbirds, so it probably isn't too early at this point.
Okay. You know, one more question from Colleen in Cherry is, can I plant my cabbage and broccoli outside right now and not cover them? And of course, we talked about this last week, you guys, about how some of those cold season crops, you know, do need a little bit of protection. Bob, is it too early to be planting those?
Well, I think cabbage and broccoli are fine. I'm skeptical about cauliflower. The plant's fine, but we're trying to set up the flower head, so that needs to be covered if you're going to set it, or you can just wait another 2 weeks or so.
For this week's Grow and Show, we're just going to show you two pictures that were shared by Barb from Carlton. She wintered over an ailing hibiscus that came back strong with some beautiful early spring blooms. You can see it there by her window. And then the other picture is a closing spent hibiscus bloom that Barb thought was especially interesting. And that is a beautiful shot. We'd like to ask people to please send in their pictures for our Grow and Show segments. We'd love to see them and get those on the air and share them with everyone. A few more questions for you guys. I know that right now the asparagus is just starting to come up, right, Bob? And you had a query from somebody about transplanting it.
Oftentimes, asparagus bed tends to either outgrow its bounds or it tends to get shady and they want to move an established bed. It needs to be done right now before the spears actually emerge, and that may be depend on where you're located. Once the spears are out of the ground, I wouldn't be moving it. And moving them is actually a real challenge because they have a very, very aggressive and fibrous root system. So you've got to be ready for that. In some cases, it's almost easier to buy new plants and actually put them in the ground in the new location. But always when the plant's dormant, so that's either immediately now or wait until the fall or very early next spring.
Okay. And then I just remembered a question that my husband's been bugging me to ask. I didn't ask it last week. Now I have to. But anyway, we have a big oak tree and there's been a lot of construction near it and a sidewalk put in about 10 feet from it. And he's just wondering about all the disturbance of the roots, if it would help to put tree spikes in there. Would that even be worth it? It's a huge old oak tree, like 75 years old.
You know, oaks have this huge taproot, so it may not impact it much at all, but sometimes what we do see is we see damage to that particular side where there's been a root disturbance, and then gradually, particularly on a mature tree, it tends to recover. So something that's mature, particularly an oak with a large taproot, I don't think there's anything to be too concerned about there.
Okay.
Younger trees, it can be different, and some of the other species that have more of a fibrous root system as opposed to a deep tap, there can be considerable amount of damage. So people need to be conscious of construction and construction sites like that.
Deb, I just want to ask you, because I know greenhouses have been doing gangbusters business. Are people going to be able to find this stuff at this point?
Well, like I said last week, my dad keeps seeding it. Our Swiss chard, because we do bright light Swiss chard, and he's got another seedlings going. They just came up. So I think, you know, as long as you're going to a local place that keeps doing it and keeps seeding, then they'll probably be available. I'm not sure as some of the, you know, box stores how they're going to do it, but I know we just keep seeding it. And that Swiss chard, the bright lights in the fall, is beautiful too. And a lot of those kales are beautiful in the gardens, even for a container.
Well, I think that that's all the time we have for questions. I want to remind people to check out our website for more great gardening information and, of course, past episodes of the show. And follow us on Instagram at Great Gardening WDSE. Well, we appreciate that. Deb, Bob, you know, it's especially fun this time of year because it seems like something new is popping out all the time. And it's just a beautiful time of growth.
Really is,
exciting.
Pam.
It's an exciting time.
Day-to-day it changes, which is so much fun. And, you know, we've got a relatively short growing season, so everything gets a little bit compressed, but get out in the garden every day and you'll notice the changes are very dramatic within 24 hours even.
Okay. Well, thanks to both of you for all your great suggestions, excellent advice. And from all of us here at Great Gardening, please stay safe and get out and enjoy the garden.
Funding for Great Gardening is brought to you by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.